and welcome to the Integrated Rehab and Performance Podcast. My name is Dr. Nick Curtis, and I am running the show here at the Integrated Rehab and Performance Center. So today we are talking about the phases of power training in the rehab and performance setting. So regardless of where you're coming into the system, we need to assess similar things when we are attacking and going for power. So again, first things first, we always look at mobility because we need to be able to access certain positions in order to create power from them. We look at mobility and asymmetry. Again, if we have pain involved, this is also a very important step where we can influence pain by making sure that we're addressing mobility and asymmetry even in areas away from the site of pain. Again, that is an idea or concept of regional interdependence, where we need to make sure that we're not just looking at the site of pain or addressing pain. We need to make sure that the joints around it are all operating the way they should be and taking off that stress and different tension and other things that the surrounding joints can offer if they're not moving properly. Besides mobility, for being able to achieve positions, and then for pain reasons, pain and stability reasons, we look at stability and motor control. So stability, very important if we're going to be able to achieve these positions, that the motor control is there, that we can actually get us into these positions, especially not just in the gym floor, but when we are in the golf swing and in the golf position, that we're able to control ourselves in these positions. Again, there's a ton of performance implication there, but there's also a whole bunch of longevity and injury potential and pain prevention or treatment if we can start working on stability and motor control in these regions. Beyond that, we also need to make sure that we are looking at just kind of raw strength too. So we need stable joints. We need to be able to control these joints well, but at some point we need to look at raw strength. Things like the shoulder complex, the hips, the core, the posterior chain, glutes, things like that. We need to be able to create vertical power, horizontal power, push-pull power, and rotational power. All very, very important for performance if we want to be able to take advantage of all the things that we worked on to their highest extent. Now from there, we have to do some kind of power-specific things. We need to translate the strength, the mobility, the motor control and stability into actual power, which is just kind of force production relative to time. So we have to be able to create high forces in short amount of time. And again, we can do this in the gym floor in the rehab clinic space, but then we also give you some drills to take onto the golf range or onto the course itself to help you feel all these changes that we've made. We can get you throwing a med ball maybe, and we get you feeling the hip, and you're able to use the hip. You're able to use that new hip mobility. You've created stability around that hip that you can kind of push into. You can create leverage off of and all these things. But we need to make sure that you're also able to do that with a golf club in your hand. So we actually have some drills that we do, some swing drills, which are less technical. Again, they need to be precise, but it's less for your actual true swing style. But more in, we want to translate what you're feeling and capable of on the gym and rehab floor to the golf course so that you can start feeling these things, and then kind of sky's the limit in terms of the more technical swing drills where you've been given access to all the positions you need to be getting into. You have stability, motor control there. You can do it repeatedly. You can practice for a long amount of time. You can practice more frequently without pain or injury potential. And you know you're strong in these positions. You're strong in general, and then you know how to create power in these things, and you also know how to utilize all these changes with a golf club in your hand. And again, like I said, sky's the limit at this point. So let's discuss all of these different areas in a little bit more detail. And if you check out, if you're watching the podcast, you'll see some video demonstrations of different drills as examples. And same thing with that blog article that's on the website, again, titled Creating Power in the Golf Swing, where you can go back and kind of click through different videos that you want to see instead of rewinding the podcast. But that's Creating Power in the Golf Swing at integratedrpc.com in the blog tab. So let's take a closer look. Okay, so first things first, let's look at mobility and asymmetry. Again, mobility is like the foundation. We have to get this part right in order to build strength and motor control on top of it. So a full TPI assessment and then a much more thorough assessment of every single joint in the body helps tell us, where we need to focus on, which areas have limited mobility, and which areas might potentially be the root cause for pain and injury that the golfer is having, right? So it's important in both aspects for the performance and the rehab therapy space. So we need to address all mobility and asymmetries, especially if one side has greater or less mobility than the other. Again, all these things kind of stack up and point towards injury potential or cause of the current injury. And it certainly is a killer for performance. So can't go into too much detail on the broad potential of mobility testing and everything that we do. Check out the other blog articles and podcast episodes, which are a little bit more precise at different maybe regions or joints that you can find some mobility testing as well as some mobility treatment stuff. But again, all of this, we need to be able to create separation and have mobility in these different segments. And a lot of that has to do with being able to even produce that kinematic sequence, which you've talked about before in different blog articles and podcasts. I will include a little video here that demonstrates or kind of describes that kinematic sequence a little bit more. But again, the idea is we need to have mobility in order to take full advantage of this kinematic sequence to make sure that these golfers and our golfers are actually they have a chance at least or a shot of being athletic and producing an appropriate kinematic sequence. So let's take a look here. Briefly, there is my last podcast and article is on mobility, right? So you can check those out. It's going to be a little bit more details on assessing mobility and the differences and different types of missing mobility. So check those out. You can also look at the podcast, the article. It's on Spotify and YouTube, and then the website, of course. So let's learn more about the kinematic sequence here.
Okay, so what is the kinematic sequence in the golf swing? Kinematic sequence is the one thing that translates between any of the top golfers. Though they have different swing characteristics and different things you might see on video, there are some things that are consistent between all the great ball strikers. One of those things is the way the body moves and the order in which it moves. Okay, so one important thing in the kinematic sequence is understanding what moves first. We're really going to start here mostly at the top of the backswing. So once we get to the top of the backswing, what moves first as we start to come back down? The answer is the pelvis. There's four things we're looking at: the pelvis, the thorax, the arm, and the club. Okay, so what we want to know at the top of the backswing is, can you create separation from your pelvis and your thorax? Because we need one to move relative to the other. We also need to make sure that it's the pelvis that's moving first. Once the pelvis starts to move, it's also the first to start to slow down, because as the thorax comes around, this starts to slow down as it slingshots our thorax. Next, after the thorax, to start moving, is going to be our shoulder. We need to make sure we have good shoulder range of motion, that we can get into that last end range piece of motion here in this right or backside shoulder. So after our pelvis stops, our thorax comes along, and then it's our shoulder that will start to move as well. And the last to get slingshotted is the hand and the club. That's the kinematic sequence in the golf swing.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about stability and motor control. There's a lot to be said about these topics. What do we mean when we say stability? Stability is, in a sense, the ability to get into certain joint positions comfortably without compensating and be able to resist motion in those positions. Motor control is kind of the quality or the way in which we're getting there. Again, can we get in these positions without compensation? Can we do it repeatedly and with similar effect? Really important, as you can imagine, for the golf swing with all the nuance and that goes on. We need to be able to achieve these positions. We need to be able to be comfortable with these end ranges of motion and be strong there and stable. So there's a certain way where we can kind of go about fixing, treating, or working on stability and motor control. I can give you a couple examples here that I'll insert into the video, into the podcast. But again, we need to make sure that we're stable in some key regions. One of them is like the pelvis and the core and the shoulder complex. We need to be able to rotate at the hips. We need to be able to flex and extend at the pelvis and rotate through the pelvis. We need to be able to rotate, extend, internally rotate, flex, abduct, adduct at the shoulder, right? There's a lot happening there at the shoulder joint, a lot of motion, which means we need to be able to control that motion and check that motion in certain cases after we've opened up some mobility. So I'll just show you 3 exercises which go about kind of addressing these 3 different regions, right? The shoulder complex, the kind of core and pelvis, and then the hips. So these are kind of what stability and motor control exercises look like.
Okay, this is the DNS 5-month side lying roll. So here we're focusing on the hip when we do this drill. Our starting position is going to be side lying. I want your elbow and your arm at 90 degrees like this. I want your bottom hip at 90 degrees and knee at 90 degrees like that. Your back leg can kind of just be floating up through here like this. You can also
post it down on the ground for a little bit of support there as well. Now we're going to focus on pushing this knee into the ground and this outside of the thigh straight down into the ground. To start that process, think of yourself like a shish kebab through the top of your head into your sacrum. We want to roll over this axis here. Try not to roll too far forward like this, right? We want to keep that roll as tight as you can around your spine, just like that. Now, the whole time, I actually want you to try and keep your shoulders in line with each other and wide, right? So as we start this drill, try to create some space right through here. How we do that is we think about creating as much space between our two shoulders as possible. Think about bringing or driving this top shoulder up towards the ceiling. That just keeps us nice and tall through there, and you feel a little space open up here. Now, maintain all that and a good breath and a strong core as we roll forward, pushing this side of the knee into the ground, and feel that tension and that back of the hip start to open up a little bit. I want you to always pushing into the ground there. Hold that for a couple seconds, and then use all that tension you just built up to slowly open yourself back up like this. Again, keeping that pressure, keeping our shoulders wide, and then slowly start to close that back down. Let your body weight start to fall into that hip, but control that roll and that fall by pushing this into the ground the whole time, controlling this roll back down. And then control that opening again as well. Good. It's a great drill for working on centration of the hip joints into the hip capsule there. Give it a shot.
Okay, for our DNS 5-month upper body roll position, what we're going to do is we're going to lay on our side. Our hips are going to be about 45 degrees with our knees at 45 degrees. We're going to stack our shoulders, so we're actually going to protract a little bit this bottom side arm so that our shoulder is directly underneath our other shoulder here. We're going to use this arm for a reference. What we're going to do here in this position is try to push our shoulder blades towards that ceiling. And what that should do is we think about doing that, it should open up some space down here, a little mouse hole through here. What I want you to do for the rest of the exercise is maintain this space. So maintain that kind of side plank position, shoulders stacked in a straight line. And then from here, we're going to let our body weight over about 5 seconds pull us forward or let us kind of drop towards the floor as we control that motion with the bottom of our arm. So we're going to push the bottom side of our arm into the ground just enough to let our body weight overcome it, keeping the space here. And then try and when you get used to it, kind of exaggerate how far you can actually get. You'll be surprised. Keep going. Again, always maintaining this pressure, keeping that space open. And then allow yourself to open up slightly. And then I want you to control that back in. Always pushing this into the ground. It's a 7 out of 10 effort. And then just controlling this as we roll over top. Again, keeping this space open through here. 5 seconds you should think on the way down, and then 5 seconds to open it back up, and just let that back of the shoulder start to burn. So all those muscles are working to control this motion of your body weight falling forward. Only stopped by you pushing this arm into the ground. Give it a shot. For our dead bug progressions, what we're going to start with is this dead bug position. There's a few things we need to understand. First is in this position, we need to get to where our low back is relatively or close to being flat on the floor. One thing we can do to help understand what this is I want you to create a giant arch, a giant space in between your low back and the floor. And it might take you some time to figure out exactly what you need to do that, but take the time to figure that out. And then I want you to do the exact opposite, where I want you to orient your pelvis and low back so that the space between your low back and the floor is 0 and your low back is completely flat on the ground. From here, what I want you to do is come out of that just slightly, or even leave your low back flat on the floor, but we don't have to be jamming that low back into the ground. The key here is with our low back either flat or just slightly out of that position, is that we have to maintain it and we can't let it move
through the motions here. And that's going to be our feedback to know if we're doing the drill well and that we're actually using our core to maintain this position. That's the whole goal. So we have our position. We can raise our legs off the ground after that. First progression is just raising our foot one at a time towards the opposite upper wall. And we can alternate feet there. Again, it gets hardest when the foot is furthest away from you. And again, we're just making sure that our low back is not changing its orientation. So we can either have it flat on the floor. I don't want you jamming it into the floor, but if you have it flat on the floor, we can feel when we lose that position, our low back, we won't feel the floor anymore. Okay? After that progression, if that's a little too easy, where we're doing 10 each leg, what I want you to do from there is just pushing the foot straight out ahead and maybe even just an inch or two off the floor. A bad rep here would be this, where I let my foot go out and my low back starts to extend and you see all the space open up through here, as opposed to that position there. Okay, so once we figure that out, and that might take some time where we build up some strength to maintain that pelvic and core orientation. The next step from there is just having our arms straight up overhead, moving with the opposite leg. This motion here really wants to make us pull our ribs up. And as we pull our ribs up, that again changes that orientation, that low back. So we have to use the core not only to control what's happening down here, but now our rib cage as well. And then the last thing that we can do is just get some weight involved. Start light and work your way up. But again, once we're able to do that without changing our rib or pelvis orientation, is we can now alternate leg with a weight overhead.
Now, to be a little bit more precise, we can take a closer look. Again, both of these, I have a few more exercises for you where we're addressing stability still, but again, we can consider a little bit more motor control in these movements as well. So previous movements, stability and motor control, mostly stability. Here, stability and motor control with an emphasis on motor control. Again, controlling motion through that joint and being stable, being able to resist and create motion. So here are a few examples of some motor control emphasized movements and exercises that we can do to address those key areas like the hips, the pelvis, core, and the shoulder complex.
Okay, for the shoulder complex movement, what we're going to do is 4 exercises in one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to lay face down on a mat here. We can use weights, but I wouldn't go any heavier than 2.5 pounds, or you can just do this without weight. First one is we're going to hold our arms out to our sides. We can press our forehead into the mat, and then we're just going to raise our hands off the ground. We want to hold that for 3 seconds and do 10 reps of that. After that, we're going to do is bring our arms into a 90-90 position like this, and we're simply just going to raise our palms off the ground without letting our elbows leave the ground. Again, hold for about 3 seconds, let this back down. Working on external rotation here. Good, about 10 of those. Next, we're going to go elbows off the ground. So it's going to look like this. In that 90-90 position, not letting your whole body come up with it. Try to stay straight in the torso and let all the movement come from the shoulders. And then the last one is going to be that same thing. Arms up here. And now we're just pressing overhead. I want you to hold each of those for 3 seconds and do about 10 reps. Progress to 2.5 pound weights, and if you can, maybe eventually 5 pound weights as well. Okay, this is our FRC thoracic rotation exercise. A few things we need here: PVC pipe. I would use, get like a box that you can use, or the corner of a wall would be better. In this case, I'm going to use a kettlebell as my kind of resistance, and you'll see what that looks like in a second, but really we need more than that. I'll show you what that looks like. Foam roller in between your, think about just below belly button height. We want this pushing up into something rigid. So Again, whether it's a box or a wall, or we need a corner of a wall to work through this. What we're going to do is let's go 1 foot up towards the side we're rotating. We're going to have this stabilizing our low back. So what this means is that I have to keep my pelvis oriented forward in order to keep that flush to the wall or the box that we're using. Otherwise, it starts to fall off like that. So all my rotation is going to be coming from up above that level. PVC pipe, what we're going to do here is pin this to the wall. I have my left knee. In this case, we could go tall, kneeling like this. What we're going to do is rotate, clear whatever object we're using, and then wherever that might be, we're going to be a couple inches short of our max rotation. I have my left hand on top, in this case, my right hand on top, and then I'm going to rotate into this, what might be the corner of a box or a wall. What we're going to do here is, again, keeping this stable. We're in this position, is I'm going to pull into this, in this case, kettlebell, and ramp up that pull production up into even a 10 out of 10 effort, but we're going to do it over 60 to 90 seconds. So you can imagine I'll start at about a 2 out of 10, work up to a 3 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 8 out of 10, until I'm giving a max effort pull this way here. After that, the 60 to 90 seconds, what we're going to do is stop pulling and then start doing lift offs. We're going to hold for a second and bring back, hold for a second and bring back. Do about 5 of those, and then we can repeat the same thing on the other side. So what we're doing is we are working into about our end range of rotation, and we're getting strong in that end range, where we're now working to pull ourselves back out of that range, ramping up over time. And then the lift offs are where we're working on increasing our range, just a few more inches every time. And then again, repeating that, holding it, getting stronger at controlling that end range rotation through there. This is my setup. Again, you need a foam roller to keep the pelvis from coming along for the ride. And then again, a PVC pipe and something like the corner of a wall or a box. Again, as you can imagine, you just place a box against the wall, pin the foam roller to the box, and then use the edge of the box, wherever that might be, right here. And then you start pushing into that box, and then you do your lift offs from there. Okay, so go ahead, give it a shot. Okay, this is the DNS low oblique sit. For this variation, what we're going to do, laying on our side, here's a few key things. We want to try and make sure that we keep this shoulder as far away from this ear as we can. So in our setup position here, we want to think strong shoulder, pushing down through that elbow. Again, we want to keep this shoulder tucked down and this joint centrated here in the shoulder complex, okay? Otherwise, we have our knees stacked on top of each other. What we're going to do is kind of bridge up towards the ceiling here. Now I'll be working my left hip in this oblique set. What I'm going to do is raise this right leg kind of off the left, get it out of the way. I'm going to now rotate, keeping a strong shoulder here, keeping this away from my ear. I'm going to rotate over this bottom side leg and hinge even a little bit back. So if you're following my hand here, what's happening at the hip is I'm rotating, I'm bringing my pelvis down and around. I'm also hinging this leg or this hip, kind of breaking that hip a little bit as we go back. I'm feeling a good kind of stretch and work of that bottom side hip. Then I use that stretch to come and unhinge and rotate out of that position there. Okay? A few things to keep in mind is we want that bottom side leg to stay on the ground the entire time. So if I shift my positioning here, and you can see with this bottom side leg is that as I raise up through here and I start rotating over, is that this leg is staying on the ground. Don't let it start to pop up off the ground like that. Okay? Don't let that leg start to extend or do anything like that. Once you find that position, we're always pushing down through this kind of outside edge of our thigh. And this angle here should stay the same. The outside part of this foot should always stay on the ground. Give it a shot.
All right, now when it comes to strength, next step, we need to just create some raw strength. That being said, we'll use some strength conditioning principles here within our clinic time and our programming that we send the the golfer home with. Again, all depending on their level, their training history, what they're willing to do, what they have access to, things like that. But again, in some form, we're going to be creating strength. Now, we can do this at the same time, and this is how we'll kind of bring some nuance to this. We can do this and work on strength at the same time as we work on the previous things like mobility and motor control and stability. So, for example, if we wanted to continue emphasizing mobility, say at the hip, here's a great way to do that. If a golfer was missing some hip internal rotation, pretty common, but a vital and really important piece of mobility to have on either hip, the lead leg or the back leg. If they were missing that internal rotation, but we've brought some of it back using our mobility stuff and stability motor control stuff early on, but we still want to create a little bit more, or we want to kind of hold on to those changes of mobility that we've created while we're producing strength, and we want to use that mobility that we've created while we're using or doing our strength work. Here's an example of how we can do that. Think about a normal split squat. That's a great way to build some strength into the quads and the glutes a little bit. We're going to do a variation of that emphasizes hip internal rotation. And we have to really have access to hip internal rotation, and we're going to use hip internal rotation while strengthening through the hip and the quad. So we're going to do a bent over split squat, and we can even do a bent over split squat with a slight turn towards the front side leg. So we're going to turn the pelvis and the trunk towards our front side leg. This again really emphasizes the need for internal rotation. In this sense, we are accessing that internal rotation at the same time that we are really loading through that joint, and same thing with the quad and the lateral hip, posterior hip, right, glute, all of those things. So we can get those strength adaptations as well as working on the mobility and using and accessing that mobility that we cleaned up a little bit earlier. So here is just an example of that, of a simple split squat, but we're doing a kind of a bent forward split squat variation, which again highlights the different things I've just mentioned here. A little way that we can tweak the strength phase to continue working on the things that we were previously working on.
Okay, this is the rack supported bent over split squat. So we can use a rack here just to help with some balance and support. We're going to have in this case, we'll pick my left leg forward. Now from here, I want my trunk to match the angle of my back leg. And we're going to maintain that angle the entire time. I can use a kettlebell or a dumbbell here to load on the side opposite my front leg. So opposite that front leg. From here, a little support, I'm going to squat straight down, stand back up, never losing this trunk forward flexion here. So again, we should be stable, have a good braced core as we do this, but we're never extending back up out of it. So staying forward, keeping the weight forward on this front foot, squatting straight down, owning that position, maintaining this forward trunk angle, and then back up. Always staying forward. All right? We don't need to get full extension here at the end. Whatever's comfortable, whatever's natural. Okay? Again, you can weight this with a kettlebell or a dumbbell, and then go and increase that load for reps and before form starts to break down. Maintain a good full foot contact with the ground on this front foot. Heel, forefoot stays in contact the entire time. Don't let your weight go towards the outside or the inside of that foot. Go ahead, give that a shot.
Okay, now in the rehab and performance space in the clinic and the gym, we need to translate it to power. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're going to use specific exercises and drills that will use the different areas of the body that we've been working on and the rest of those areas to start to integrate those back together again in a way in which we are creating speed and force, right? So that is power. So again, we can just use a few different exercises precisely kind of placed within the treatment plan to help take those areas that we've been working on and improve them in this quality, which is, again, accepting force and creating force under high speeds or high velocity. Very important that we are able to translate this in the gym and the clinic floor, and to do it in a most golf-like way as possible. Make sure we're using rotational force, push-pull, and vertical force, all those things. And then we can create some constraints which make sure that we are, again, mimicking golf-like positions and movements. That being said, we still need to take this onto the course, but for this stage now, we're doing it in the clinic and the gym. Here's just a few examples of different ways that we can use those principles of power of force and speed to mimic golf-like positions and work on certain things that we've been working on. In this case, let's again look at the hip. If we're working on hip mobility, we've improved hip mobility, we've worked on stability, motor control over that hip, and we have increased that hip strength. Now let's use that hip in end ranges of motion of internal rotation like we need in the golf swing. Let's use the hip in the frontal plane, which is that side-to-side plane, right, which we need for sure in the golf swing. And let's use that hip in like a rotational way, which we definitely need in that swing. So here are just 2 exercises which kind of help transfer and create, and we start working on creating power in these ranges that we need in the golf swing.
Okay, these are our skater bounding lateral hops. We're going to start with a yielding emphasis with these, where we're focusing on absorbing force and getting deep into our joints here, especially the hip, and then coming out of that as we jump. As opposed to a more of a stiff plyometric more version where we're going to kind of stick the landing hard, jump up from there, and then do our other round. So I'll show you what that looks like. We're starting with the yielding, force absorbing, external rotation, flexion version of it. So what that looks like is in our start position, we're on the outside leg. I want you to sink into this hip. I want you to feel the glutes kind of get onto a little bit of a stretch, with a little bit of rotation, but I want you to try to keep your chest square to the wall in front of you. So we're letting ourselves kind of rotate through this hip, and then we bound out of that. Like that. So you notice that when you land, you absorb that force, into this hip, you do a lot of flexion down into this position here, and then you come up out of that. So that's the lateral skater bound with yielding emphasis. Okay, for the side kettlebell swing, what we're doing here is a variation of the kettlebell swing where we're keeping the kettlebell in front of us, and now we're moving in the side to side of the frontal plane here. Okay, so what I want us to think about doing is keeping your feet in line with each other. What we're going to do is bring the kettlebell back, shoot it through. So what that looks like is bring it back, shooting up and through. Here you'll notice what's happening at my knees is if I try to keep both feet flat on the ground and keep that kinetic chain closed, we're going to get a lot of motioning or relative motion trying to happen here at the hips. Is exactly what we want in some cases. So what we're really using is getting a ton of hip activity. Right, in this case, it would be internal rotation on this right side as I come through, and then internal rotation as I come through onto this side. What I can do is use that stretch or that pull from here, and then use that to push out of that side. Same thing here. Stretch, opening, moving into internal rotation here, and then pushing through. Again, if we try to keep our feet flat and keep our heels from coming off the ground, we're going to really influence how much motion is coming from the hips through here. You see the knees are bending a little bit, internal rotation, pushing out of it. And you can do that in both directions. Focus on feeling the stretch, throwing it through, feeling the stretch, throwing it through, and then you can start increasing the weight and load on this. And again, you should feel that weight shift happening from side to side, something that we miss a lot in our everyday life or even training. So we're missing this weight shift from side to side and training it and feeling it. So go ahead and give that a shot.
Okay, last kind of topic, we need to make sure that we're taking all that power, strength, motor control, stability, and mobility, and we're able to do it with a club in our hand on the golf course and on the range. What we can do is we can, again, depending on the patient and the client in front of us, is we can suggest some swing drills that we can take right onto the course that will, again, help emphasize that translation or that transfer from the clinic to the golf course, which, again, is vital. So if they're having any issues, we've opened up their hips and they've got so much more hip mobility and strength and stability, and their positioning is so much better, but they're just not feeling it, or they're still having the same swing issues, where we can give them a few drills that will teach the brain, teach the body when we're swinging a lighter object like a club and we're in the golf position. This is how we utilize all of that mobility, strength, stability, all that stuff, all that timing that we worked on in that regard in the clinic and the gym. This is how we start to feel it on the course. So after a few sets, reps of using some of these drills, the golfer at least knows, okay, this is what change has been made in me. Okay, now let's go back to my other swing drills, or if you're using a swing coach or a pro in the area, that you can go back to them and they can say, hey, they will give you some cues, some insights, and you'll be able to actually get into those positions. You'll be able to actually feel the right things. They'll ask you to stop doing something, and you'll know what you need to do to stop doing that thing. Again, this is how we transfer and translate into the mechanics of the swing, but also into the ability to create force and power. So in this case, we'll focus specifically on power. And again, for the example we've been using, say we've been working on hip internal rotation and things like that, especially say the lead hip, where you need to be able to swing down and access internal rotation for power and just for the space to be able to move without compensating on that lead leg for internal rotation. Here are two example drills that we could prescribe to someone who is having trouble in that last stage of translating it and feeling it on the golf course.
Okay, so this is a golf drill. This is the lift, lead, heel drill. This is going to help us translate all the work that we've been doing in the gym and in the clinic on opening up hip mobility as well as stability and motor control. It's going to help us translate that from the gym floor and the clinic floor onto the golf range and the golf course itself. So again, this isn't much of a swing drill as it is kind of a sensation. Translate all that work that we've been doing to feel those hips working, and then we're going to start feeling this now on the golf course itself. So we're helping influence that translation where you can start using this. You can start practicing in this position and with this new mobility and stability that you have. So again, we're focusing this mainly on the hips. Say for instance, we're working on hip mobility, whether it's internal rotation of the other side. The lift, lead, heel drill, we use to short and swing here. But when you're out in the range, what I want you to do is on the backswing is to lift that lead side heel. So get up onto your toes a little bit. And the key here is now on the downswing is to slam that heel down into the ground as you come down into the downswing. So what you can see is happening there is we're really emphasizing our ability to post up into this lead side leg. And once we close that kinetic chain there, we can't get rotation down through the foot, as that rotation has to happen somewhere else. It's going to have to happen here at the hip, which is what we want. It's going to really emphasize that. So again, we're slamming that foot, that heel into the ground, we're posting up through it on the downswing. And you can see now we're using all this internal rotation that we've built through our time here in the clinic and on the gym floor. Now we have a drill. It's like, hey, I need to be able to feel that, or my swing isn't changing much. Well, it's like, let's influence you to start feeling what that's like to actually use that range of motion and all that stability that we've built into this hip to actually do it during your golf swing. That's what this drill is going to help us for, okay? Again, as we come down, we slam that heel. It's going to help teach us to keep our hip back here. It's going to limit us to, it's going to help us use that glute and that posterior and side hip that we've been working on to keep that pelvic control, to keep that back while allowing for hip internal rotation. It also keeps us from early extending. If we can do this correctly, it's going to keep us from swaying through in the golf swing. It's going to keep us from doing that. And instead, we post up and we get a strong hip that we can really create some power through. Okay, so once you try this at the beginning of some of your range sessions, just feel that sensation of getting into that left hip. If you're a lefty, be into your right hip. Feel that sensation. Feel that start to translate. Hey, I feel this in the gym when we're doing those side-to-side kettlebell swings, and we're doing the kettlebell swings off to the side, or if we're doing a med ball throw, and it's like, man, we're doing a really good job after we've created some mobility of using that hip in the gym. And now it's just that last step to really translating it, make sure we can do it with a club in our hands. Okay, so go ahead, give that a shot. Okay, so this is a swing drill that's going to help us focus on translating hip mobility and stability and strength from the clinic floor, the gym floor, and onto the actual golf course itself. So again, we're going to focus on the lead side hip here. It's also going to be great to drill for any early extension or sliding that's going on in the golf swing. So all we're doing in this drill, we're taking normal, maybe chip shots or whatever. You can go up to maybe 9 iron, 8 iron if you want. Take some decent cuts at it. But what we're doing here is we are taking our back foot and we're just going to post it up behind us. Okay, so here for just a little bit of support. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're taking normal swings through here, normal setup posture, everything else is normal. We're taking swings and it's going to force us, especially if you come through, I'm taking some kind of half swings here. As we come through, it's going to force us to stay stable and strong on this lead side hip so that we have to rotate through that hip. We can't break at the knee. If we did, we'd totally lose our balance. So instead, we're forced to have to come through, use all that hip mobility that we created and stability to get through and rotate through that swing. We're going to really emphasize this lead side hip and its ability to be mobile, right? So we have full access to range of motion. Now we're saying, hey, let's actually use it in the golf swing. We did a good job of cleaning it up in the clinic. What we need you to be able to do now is feel what that's like to actually use that hip. We did a good job of creating sensation of you doing that. You're in the clinic and in the gym. We can translate that onto the golf course. What does that feel like in the actual swing when you're actually holding a club? This is a great drill for starting to feel that a little bit. Try a couple cuts like this at the beginning of your range sessions and give it a go.
All right, so to conclude, if we're going to work on and focus on creating power in the golf swing, we need to make sure we're working on every aspect of that golf swing and every aspect of the body: mobility, stability, motor control, strength, and power, right? And then transferring that power, transferring that feel onto the golf course with a golf club in our hand. There is a lot that goes into it. It all depends on the person and patient that is standing in front of us. It depends on what the screening and what the initial assessment says. It depends if there's pain involved, where the pain is, what the pain is coming from, regional interdependence, what other joints are involved that are not at the site of pain, all sorts of things like that. So a great assessment is always the first place to start. And then we can go into mobility and work our way through the stages that kind of start to blend into each other that we had kind of talked about today in this podcast. So yeah, that is the most integrated and thorough way of working on and truly getting to peak power in the golf swing. This is how we go about doing it. Again, check out the blog article at integratedrpc.com to be able to kind of scroll through the same information we talked about today, go over it again, and then be able to go to certain sections and click on some of the videos that if you want to re-see or check out some of these videos again. And then you can go right onto the YouTube channel from there, different areas to check out more information, go onto that blog page and look at other blog articles which go maybe onto more details on certain specific topics that we talked about today. Maybe it's a specific joint, maybe it's a specific topic like mobility, maybe it's a specific topic like motor control or strength, whatever it might be. So again, this is a kind of a comprehensive podcast, and the article is certainly comprehensive. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, contact at integratedrpc.com, or just give the office a call at 585-478-4379. And if you're in the Nashville area and you want to schedule a visit, go ahead and go on the website, and you'll be able to schedule a free discovery call. That discovery call or visit is just like a 10 to 20 minute talk or exploration of the clinic, where we get to show you the type of things that we do. Again, if you're reading this article or listening to this podcast, watching the videos, you start to have a pretty good sense of what some of the differences are with this clinic from other clinics and how we can go about helping you. But of course, schedule that call or just call the number, email, whatever you need to do. Be happy to help out. Thanks for listening. Bye.